begin our session with an opening prayer and a smudge here. That's just to help to clarify and purify ourselves and our gathering, to take our thoughts and prayers to the Creator. So let us pray. Creator God, one who stands with us, helps us, teaches us, holds us as we encounter several challenges in this lifetime, as we learn to find a balance between our life and creation. May we be able to lean on one another, to learn from one another, to gain insight, that we might pass that along to the next generation, that they might know better, that they might do better, that they might learn from our mistakes, from our shortcomings. We pray for a balanced understanding and a kind heart to know that we have failed at certain things. We continue to struggle, but we have faith that we are meant for a higher purpose, that we are meant for good in this life. We pray on Jagezi, Tuan Jezi, Jesus Christ, and Chaparchesi, Chagawaka, Mahogu, Marichinze, Mari Chabichen, Megahaz, Neguichet, Nea Itia. Amen. We do that prayer because in our tradition, oftentimes we were banned from doing that. So we were not allowed to say our prayers. We were not allowed to observe our cultural institutions. And so in the church, as we work towards reconciliation and the calls to action, we remember that there is always a necessity to bring that information to light. I light a orange candle here for the young people who have been found in several instances in the past couple of weeks. So we remember the children who never came home and the connections of those families, the trauma that they went to, the trauma that they continue to go through, and the impacts that that has on our people today, which we will talk about. And so we light that in remembrance of those children in Fort Will and the Williams Lake First Nation, and the ones that were found at the St. Philip Indian Residential School in Saskatchewan. So as we begin, I'm just going to start here with the PowerPoint. And I'll do a bit of a session talking a little bit about the topics that we'll go through today. And then we have two speakers here, Teresa Snow, who's my sister and works in wellness and in helping in our communities to do some healing and programming for those that are needing more guidance. And so she works in those areas of social welfare and helping and wellness, community wellness. We also have Amanda Goodstoney, who is a member of the Stoney First Nation and also trained in her field of social work in other areas. So we'll have her to speak. And we also have a few other people here that I'd like to have an opportunity to speak from. So today we have Indigenous Pink Shirt Day. Indigenous Pink Shirt Day began as a rallying cry around the anti-bullying efforts. We see that a lot of times the children who go to non-Indigenous schools are suffering from acts of bullying. And so in this is to recognize that, but there's also Indigenous bullying that happens at the school level that is a result of the impacts of residential schools. And so in those areas, we also look at community wellness and how can we address some of those impacts from children so that they aren't traumatized growing up, that they learn to have a good life in our communities, and that they learned how to treat one another with respect and according to our traditional teachings. So that is where we begin. I did a talk yesterday a little bit about these items on the legacies of violence. And so one of the things, the primary focuses around that is colonialism and the impacts of colonialism as an act of taking over land, as an act of taking over and controlling the way that that land was then utilized or performed, with things like ranching and agriculture and different things that the land was forced to do that was never had done before in that way. And so this involved the eradication of the buffalo, the genocide of the buffalo, and how that changed the livelihood of many here on the plains. And so here for me, just to do a bit of a land acknowledgement and a reminder that we are on Treaty 7 territory. We are also, from the various territories of the people gathered here, closely associated with Indigenous lands and the lands of the people, which have a story, which have a repercussion because of our existence in this territory. When we would traditionally meet, we would greet through our lineage. We would talk about my father and my grandfather and their connection to the lands and the people that we are encountering if we step onto somebody's land. And so there's a way of introducing ourselves as a visitor, and there's the reciprocal allowance of the people who are there to say, we welcome you. And then in that welcome, you become a guest of that people's relationship to the land. So as we step into these ways of thinking, we have to understand that we haven't had that sort of welcome and response to really understand what our relationship here on the land was supposed to be. So with the treaties that were signed here in this area in 1877, there is a larger connection to how we place that relationship. So sometimes with the crown, and then more practically with each other in these lands, how we learn to respect one another. So when we say we are all treaty people, it's because we are bound by this relationship together, and that it has not always been good. It has not always been benevolent. And here, with these legacies of violence, we see some of these impacts today. The other thing that we talk about is residential schools, and this is because through the apology and through the time frame that we have with the United Church, the first apology of any church denomination or any group came in 1986. And so 1986, the first apology was made by the United Church for colonialism. And then later in 1998, an apology for the residential schools came forward by the minister who goes to Hillhurst, Bill Phipps. So these two apologies began that cycle of how do we seek to step into reconciliation. The response to those apologies was the Indian Residential School class action lawsuit by Phil Fontaine that was resolved in 2007. And then from then, the signed agreement was implemented. And one of the stipulations of that agreement, the Indian Residential School Settlement Agreement, was the TRC Truth and Reconciliation Commission. That work went on for 5 years, and then a report was created and released in 2015. And the United Church adopted those calls to action, saying we will work to fulfill that. And so we've only been in this act of reconciliation for the past 6 years, but it has taken that long, since the 1980s, to get to this point. And that's because of a lot of the wrangling and dealing with issues that emerge from these legacies of violence, but also the people who deny that and downplay the importance of it. And so we see from these first two elements how they impact our people and how the world that we live in has responded to those issues that have come up for Indigenous people who are historically over incarcerated, are more likely to be victims of crime, especially women who end up on the missing and murdered women register, and have issues with the foster care system, the child care systems, the child and family service systems, where children are continue to be apprehended, just as they were apprehended in the early part of the century, and the big push for apprehensions in the 1960s that became the um, uh, I've lost my train of thought on that. Sorry.
The 60s scoop.
60 scoop. There you go. Thank you. 60 scoop. And so those primarily have affected the way that our people are become socialized. And part of that, the underlying critical aspect of that is patriarchy. A lot of our societies, I come from the Stoney Nakoda Society, which is Stoney Nakoda First Nation, and it's a matriarchal society. And so the women are in charge of education. The women are in charge of the household. They own the property. They are the rights holders, and they allow the men to govern. They allow the men through election and through selection of a chief to be able to govern. But it is not without the approval of women. And so when we encounter European patriarchy, where all the rights of women were taken away, that created an entire imbalance in our communities and a shift away from the rights of women to the rights of men. And there have been repercussions of that in the way that women are treated, in the way that women are able to even have a say in their community if they continue to marry within the community, or if they marry outside of the community, they are likely to be pushed off. And that was the issue that came up for the Bill C-31 families. They were excluded from our communities because of the rule of this governance and patriarchy. The next thing we think about as one of these legacies of violence is genocide, and how that has impacted the residential school system, the acts of killing off of the buffalo and other intentional acts that have curbed the people's ability to live and thrive. Other things like chemical warfare, germ warfare, used to in the incidents of smallpox that were used to decimate communities, and diseases that continue to have a huge impact on the populations of Indigenous people. Another aspect of this ties into the residential school, and it is that forced assimilation, that we had to forget our languages, we had to forget our culture, we had to forget the ways that we were socialized in our own communities, our kinship ties, and the language that became the foundation of how we see the world. And so that had a detrimental effect. We also see, because of the patriarchy, we also see continued gender violence within community and outside the community. And that becomes to this issue around bullying, that issue around lateral violence in community, and how that abuse gets perpetuated intergenerationally. And there's also this element of internalized oppression, of how we keep one another down, or how we are living through expectations around that. And so it's this ongoing question of that development. So this is a model that I'll turn to later with Teresa. But one of the things I just wanted to point out briefly is this, some of the interconnections around this. So talking about lateral violence, we see lateral violence in the workplace, things like unfair assignments, exclusion, refusing to help or support, sabotage, gossip, hypercritical or criticism without solutions, intimidation, blaming or put downs, shouting, or unprofessional conduct. All of these tend to emerge when there's lateral violence in communities. And so we see some of these elements happening in our local communities, and we don't really name it as such. And so the reason I bring this in is to really remember that in our church communities, in our social community, in our social ways that we are in and amongst one another, these elements come up as well. And we can start to see that there is lateral violence within the mainstream society that exists that remains unnamed for a large part. The last thing I want to talk about here is just the patterns of spiritual abuse, the forcing of conversion to a different religion, which happened for Indigenous people, the not allowing of religious practice, which has happened to Indigenous people, the not allowing of religious services, and that would be like our sun dances or other primary religious or spiritual ways that we practice. Forcing attendance at religious services, which happened for many Indigenous people, degrading what was sacred to a victim. And I always bring up the Dakota Access Pipeline in this example because the elders and traditional knowledge people put together reports of the sacred areas within the pipeline route. What happened was once that was released and divulged to the local people, so the farmers and others, those sacred areas became destroyed just because they knew where they were and they wanted to take that out. So there's that type of spiritual violence and spiritual abuse. Humiliation in front of people affiliated with victims' religion or spirituality. You can see this just by the, even in our social situations where people talk about our practices in different ways, and then using religion to justify abuse. So in this very important portion of how we socialize, I think that we've kind of looked at ways that are detrimental. And here, when we think about what our faith communities can do, part of that is in the working through of some of these difficult issues, creating a safe environment for this, and that comes with the commitments to ensure safety of groups, and that's an ongoing negotiation and work. To teach through lived experiences, to remember and center ourselves in our experience so that we are dealing with tangibles, to educate your community, to work with others in trauma-informed care and training, to also speak out, to support your children, and to develop and help domestic violence victims, setting up systems to help and support those that are in need. I just have a video from Dr. Reverend Carmen Lansdowne that I wanted to share. Had a conversation with her and just got some of her feedback on Pink Shirt Day.
Hello, my name is Carmen Lansdowne, and I'm a member of the Heiltsuk First Nation and an ordained minister in the United Church of Canada. I'm currently serving as the Executive Director at First United Church Community Ministry Society and First United Church Social Housing Society in Vancouver's downtown east side. And I also was recently nominated as the candidate for moderator of the United Church of Canada. So thanks for having me. So in our work in the downtown east side, I think we see like the very end state of trauma, right? So the idea that hurt people is not new. And I think that it's for our people, for Indigenous people, it's one of the legacies of colonization and residential schools in the 60s scoop, and the, vast over apprehension of Indigenous children into so-called foster care or so-called care, is that there's been so many ways in which our people have been traumatized, and in which like healthy role models for leadership, healthy role models for parenting have been erased or forcibly removed from people's lives. And as we collectively try to heal from that ongoing trauma that's it's an assault on us every day, we're also expected to grow up into professionals who behave a certain way at work and who have huge pressures on ourselves to be better parents than our parents were, and have the ever-present fear of the fact that if we aren't perfect parents or we aren't better parents, that our children will be apprehended and taken from us, which hooks into all of this old generational pain. And so there's a lot going on underneath the surface all the time, no matter if you're living in a place of acute trauma and struggling with mental illness or addiction, or if you have managed to take on a leadership role in an organization or in your tribal council. There's all of this baggage that we all carry that I think is so important for us to talk about and to deal with.
What do you think some of the ways of addressing that would be?
I think there's so much beauty and strength and wisdom in our traditional ways of being in relationship with each other, in our traditional ways of knowing about the world around us. And the type of violence that has been perpetrated against our people has been so systematic and acute and brutal. And I don't think that our traditional ways were set up to heal from that. I don't think that even in cultures like ours on the West Coast, where we had wars were more prevalent and we had like more hierarchical societies, the types of deep spiritual and physical and sexual violence that were perpetrated on our people over the last 400 years, 500 years have been so far outside of anything that our world knew before. And I don't know that our own systems and ways of being on their own can help to heal us. I think there's a lot of wisdom in modern brain science that can help inform the ways that we try to heal individually and collectively. And part of that is reclaiming those old ways and caring for each other and being in balance with the created order and with each other in a renewed way. And so I'm not saying that our ways don't have value. I think they're deeply, deeply important, not just for our communities, but for the non-Indigenous world as well. But I don't think that our traditional worldviews have all of the answers for that healing, because they weren't designed to heal people from what we've had to go through. And so I think some of the modern science around trauma and how our brains react when we're in trauma are really important things to learn about and to know and to understand. I think one of the things that happens with lateral violence in our communities is we have these, we know that deep injustice has been done to us and that abuse has been perpetrated to us as individuals. And then as we try and grow and stand up for ourselves, sometimes we replicate that behavior just by saying you're, when we feel threatened, when we feel any kind of social threat, then we automatically lash out, because one, that's how our brains are designed to survive physical threats. But two, there's all of this trauma that we haven't actually, for lack of a better word, exercised from our bodies. Right? So we carry this trauma around in our DNA, and it causes this threat response in us. And so it's so easy to fall into harming each other as a way of trying to protect ourselves, rather than be able to stop and think and be like, okay, my doctor taught me a really great technique. It's called SOTA. So you stop, observe, detach, and affirm. So you stop and you realize, oh, okay, my blood pressure is going up. I'm feeling stressed. I feel like my security in this situation is threatened. I'm going to detach from that and just realize that that's what's happening. And even in that moment of just stopping, observing, and detaching, then I've moved from my the lizard part of my brain, like the limbic system that responds to threat, into my prefrontal cortex, which is the part of me that is capable of executive function and higher cognition, and able to realize, like, actually there's no tiger at my door. Like, the person who's reacting in front of me is reacting from a place of shame and trauma, and maybe I need to get curious about what's really going on with them. But those are hard things to do, right? So we get into these battles with each other, both in the Indigenous church and not. And I think that that's even some of the dynamic that happens between, like, the non-Indigenous church and the Indigenous churches. We have, there's a social threat to the non-Indigenous church because, one, of the shame of having participated actively in colonization of Indigenous people and in the so-called civilizing missions of the residential schools in the 60s scoop. But also there's the social threat of the church as a place of deep comfort and safety for many people, and any change to that structure, any change to the power systems within that structure also create a threat response. And so, I'm really interested in having conversations about modern brain science and the ways that we can learn about the fact that it's not always our emotions or our brain that is reacting against each other. It's actually like our bodies that are reacting first, and learning ways to mitigate that, and to choose forgiveness, right? Like, being forgiven is one of the number one indicators for recovery from trauma, for recovery from addiction and mental illness. If somebody can tell you early into your journey that you are forgiven and that you are loved, that reduces that social threat and that threat of isolation. And so it actually allows your body to calm. And then, like, early in my own journey, my mom said to me, "I'm so tired of not trusting you. So I'm going to start acting as if I trust you, and it's up to you to decide if you want to become trustworthy." And that was like a really big step in how we started on our healing journey together. And I think that in our conversations around bullying, we have to stop casting blame and realize that it's our bodies responding to these generational threats, and be gentle with each other.
A suggestion for the church, something for the non-Indigenous church to be mindful about when they're trying to do their reconciliation work, or when they're trying to make change.
For me, I think the importance of recognizing Pink Shirt Day and anti-bullying efforts within the church and just in society generally is one visible way of saying that we are living out the new creed of the United Church of Canada, that we are not alone, that we live in God's world, and that we are called to be the church, to celebrate God's presence, to live with respect in creation, to love and to serve others, to seek justice and to resist evil. And I think that, all of those pieces are part of what it means to talk about bullying, to talk about trauma, and to try and find more gentle, forgiving, and respectful ways of being in a relationship with each other, both within the Indigenous church and between the Indigenous church and the non-Indigenous church. So for everybody who shows up to talk about Pink Shirt Day and who wears their pink shirts in solidarity with this movement, Wallace Gaius.
Thank you for being with us for that. I'd like to turn to Amanda Goodstony, member of the Stoney First Nation, to give a bit about her background and to talk to us a little bit about some of the work that she's done in dealing with issues of lateral violence and with bullying on reserve. Hello.
Hi, Namarhamne. Hi, Shnius. Can you guys hear me?
Yes.
Wonderful. First of all, I want to say Shnius to Tom for the invite. I really do appreciate the opportunity. Shnius pewan nitin magichomne opemakyamne nitin pinamabich. ne dagun yapacak ne da hopa dagun ne wahnachin ipchich ishnish. So yes, my name is Amanda Goodstoney. I am a member of the Stoney Nation, direct descendant of Chief Goodstoney. My history, my work history, and my experiences here on the community consist of 15 years of social work. I worked closely with Children's Services out here in Stoney, as well as the provincial offices located in the city for many years. And through that alone, I have quite a few experiences when it comes to lateral violence, not just within the community, but as well as the communities outside in the city settings. I find that throughout my time in social work, I've witnessed and learned quite a bit about myself and how others see and understand of the residential school impacts. A little bit, if I could, I'll share just a little bit of myself. Aside from work, I am the daughter of a residential school survivor, and a daughter to a father who also attended residential school, but sadly, due to the residential school trauma experienced, I lost my father to in a tragic way. So I know the residential school impacts and the lateral violence all too well. I think I can say that as a child, I was born into an environment where lateral violence seemed to be a part of our everyday upbringing. My mother was enrolled in residential school at a young age as 4, lived in the residential school facility until she was 12, and then attended and finished her residential school 4 years in day school. So just that alone would kind of give you an idea as to what kind of upbringing I personally had. When you're dealing, or when you've grown up in an area, or if you've grown up in a household that have parents that have attended residential school, it's a different upbringing. I can assure you that. I didn't grow up in an area where I was surrounded by love, compassion, a nurturing family, a supportive environment. None of that was in existence. And I don't blame my parents for that. As a young child, obviously, I couldn't understand my relationship with my parents, nor could I understand the residential school experiences they had survived, which led to a lot of the way we were brought up. So coming from a direct experience of never understanding or never knowing a mother's hug until she was in her 50s, 60s, just before 60 was the first time I was able to hug her. So having an upbringing like that, you can imagine how hard that was. And I never understood. But it was later in my years that I slowly started to ask questions, because it was impacting my relationship with my family. And lateral violence, like the whole bullying and put downs and the distrust and dishonesty and not having that supportive environment, was really something that took a toll on me. And I was blessed to have a grandmother that didn't attend residential school. And that was because her mother removed her from her home and left for a few days until the government officials were done collecting children. So she was safe to return home, and it was through her traditional teachings and values that she maintained and carried forth to her throughout her life, that she was able to teach me a lot of the traditional values and practices and lessons that allowed me to start my journey through the healing. So in the work environment, like moving forward, like my healing journey started at an early adult age. It wasn't anything I did earlier than that. But yeah, it was through my grandmother's grace. And she's the foundation of, my full understanding of what love and compassion and nurturing was, because she was able to give me all that. Because I guess she saw how impacted I was with the way things were at home. And when I started to really look into asking questions as to why was my mom like this and why was my dad like that, and I started to get more information, I slowly started to realize what residential school was and what it meant. And when I started hearing about all the stories, it just broke me. Like, it broke me emotionally, mentally, and spiritually, because I couldn't imagine. And then everything just started to make sense. As to my upbringing, I was like, okay, because my mother she didn't receive any of the things that I was expecting from her as a mom, or what I thought a mom would be doing for her child. There was nobody there to tell her I love you. There was nobody there to hug her. There was nobody there to show her anything in regards to what a healthy family unit was like. She didn't have any of that. So how could she give me something she never learned or had? So that was my understanding of residential school. And moving forward, I became passionate about helping a few of my other friends and a few of my other family members, because it seemed like I was slowly starting to see what the residential school impact did to many of us. It wasn't just me. It wasn't just me going through all this. So within my family or within my friendship circle, we slowly started to talk about it. And the more we knew, the more we understood, the more we started to understand the impacts that it had on us. Still, even though it was our parents that went to the school, we still had those intergenerational traumas, those impacts and the traumas, and we continue to carry them. So I think that's what sparked my passion to help families get well, and to understand and to learn, to make the young people and everybody in my community understand that it had nothing to do with them. It wasn't their fault. It wasn't what they did. It's what happened. It's how it impacted each and one of us deeply. We're always going to be scarred by the intergenerational trauma. Those scars will always remain, but we can heal past that. And I strongly believe that. After 15 years in social work, I quickly after 15 years, I've come to a realization that it wasn't my place. That's not the kind of help I wanted to offer my community. I started to see a different way of helping others, and one that didn't require breaking up family units, because I know what it's like to have a child taken from the community and placed in the city and have to walk out that door with children crying because they wanted to go home. But legally, I had no control over situations like that. And 8 years later, I still have those. thoughts. I still think about children like that. So it wasn't a way that I wanted to help quickly. So I started to really do some more healing, started to ask some more questions. And then I found my passion to help families. And how do I help families stay together? How do I help my community heal from this pain? So I started devoting some of my time, or most of my time, in finding ways of healing and talking to families. And by doing so, it was connecting. We were able to connect with each other and to support each other and just listen to each other and cry together. So what I do right now, I'm under the Stony Family Resource Network. I'm the family support worker, but also on the side of that, I'm also a Stony traditional parenting educator, teacher. And that's where I see our healing begins. Yeah. So going back to my first realization of wanting to help families, I knew that in order to make a difference in our community, I had to really heal myself first. I had to take care of me. I had to be ready, because some of the stories and some of the things I was going to hear and listen to would hurt me too, because it would take me back years. So I did a lot of that. I spoke to a lot of elders. I listened to my grandma. And one of the lessons I carry still to this day and moving forward, I'll continue to carry, is my great grandfather, William, had sat me down as a child and had said something to me in Stony that I didn't understand at that time, but I do now. And he said, Chubuja, Togara nene, nari o tangagina, ni nari ne, alhogipa, ne makocha ne, nustanchas, Togara ye chango namaniktiga, gaki wakanta naktiga, nar izet. It's in nar ine ahoyagi pechas, o maniktine, o ambar jihangtats. Nimine da einginaktaska, winchastane ahopa, Togara naktine zigixia. And that was a teaching that I got from my great grandfather. And that's what I continue to carry with me. And it holds true. As Stony Nakota people, in Yeskabne, spirituality is the center of our teachings. It all comes back down to our spirit. And what my grandfather had said was, honor and protect and love your spirit. As you leave this world, it'll be your spirit to continue to creator. And creator, he will ask, or she will ask at that time, how did you use the life I gave you? Did you make the best of everything? Did you love everybody? Did you respect everybody? The values of life. So at the end of the day, that's pretty much what I valued and I trust. And with that in my heart, I center my focus when it comes to how do we heal from intergenerational trauma. I go back to it starting from the beginning. We can't repair what was done in the past, but we can heal and we can start anew. And by teaching our younger generation, and helping our parents and our young teenagers and bringing them back to traditional ways of life would help strengthen that spirit, would help strengthen them, help them find their identity again. And then the more they honor themselves, they honor life, the more they respect. And then that alone, healthy families will develop into a healthy community. With having said that, yeah, we have a couple elders. Actually, I've sat down with many elders over the past month, and they've shared so much wisdom and knowledge, and I appreciate each and one of them for doing that. And it allows me to better prepare on this journey of healing. And I'm able to connect with them and understand. And now I'm able to help people in my community, as well as any other Indigenous community or anyone that wants to understand more about the impacts. Lateral violence has been around forever here. It was actually a normal thing because we didn't understand that. We didn't understand what we were doing to each other. And still, those parents that haven't healed yet, they still don't understand. Sometimes they're not even aware that they're doing it because it's been around for so long. But once the education comes in, once you start to talk about it, once we start connecting, I see that then they start to recognize, hey, wait, you're right, I have been doing this. And how can I change that? And that's when we begin with smudging. Come, let's have a smudge. Let's pray. Let's ask Creator to give us the direction that we need to go. And I'll walk with you on that journey. It's not about judgment. I'm not better than you, nor is anybody else. Like, we're all equal people. We all been given a chance to live this life. So we always have to say, thank you for another day. So I live by that now. And life has definitely been a blessing. I'm now able, because I understand the intergenerational trauma deeply and its impacts, and I'm healing, and I understand what I would need to do to help my community is going back to our traditional ways. I'm now able to parent my own children and find a way or stop intergenerational trauma from carrying forward. This is where we need to stop it. We need to teach, and we need to educate, and we need to heal ourselves, and then we can help. So yeah, I'm very blessed and honored to have this opportunity to share that. And I'd be more than willing to answer any questions if you have. But thank you, Tom, for the invite. I really do appreciate that.
Thank you. Thank you for coming, and thank you for being part of this sharing here that we're doing for this day. And I'm just going to call on Teresa if she's there. And if not,
Yep, I'm here.
okay.
Okay. How long did you give for time? How much time do we have? Not that I'm going to go long.
Trying to go
so.
like around 8 and maybe have some questions after that if people are wanting to.
Okay. Okay. Amboshte. Hello. Good day. My name is Teresa Snow. Yeah, thank you for the invite to speak here tonight. Shnish, Amanda, thank you for sharing so much knowledge and bringing about some more awareness on lateral violence and bullying. And so I think that's something, just to echo what Amanda was talking about, and how Indigenous communities, it's existed for a long time. It's been normalized in our community. It is something that we've seen. It's a historical inheritance that we've had from the coming of other perspectives, other groups, ways of doing things, and then taught to our ancestors, and then that cycle of abuse going on to us and continuing that lateral violence up into the present day. I've experienced it within my own community. I've experienced it within Greater Treaty 7 area, within work, within recreational too, as well, and within spirituality and belief systems. And so it's a very hard thing to come to understand. And once you do understand the historical impacts and the origins of it, then you can understand why things happened in your family the way they did, and why family members, why family roles were the way they were, and why our origins of creation or our family of origins, why they were the way they were. And then understanding that we break that cycle, and then we have within that the family, our family of creation, and how we do things and how we change things around and how we move forward. And in expressing that with our kids, if we weren't shown to have emotions or to express emotions from our family members, and that's something we do with our family. We continue to do that with them and teach that with them. And that's something for me that I learned to do, and I do some more with my girls now, because it was something growing up, because both our parents were in residential school, and so they didn't always have that ways of expression and saying I love you. But how we know they loved us is they made sure we were clothed, went to school, we had an education. And so these things are what ways of showing that they love you. And that's how we saw that our parents loved us. And so for me, in bringing up my daughters and being a parent and wanting to change that, break that cycle of not having as much expression, I start doing that with my girls and telling them that. And I think too, with the pandemic, we've had a lot of loss in communities. And so just understanding that, how Amanda said, every day is a day to give thanks, because you don't know what's going to happen. You don't know where people are at. And so to always meet them and greet them in a good way. And it's like that traditional teaching, being a good relative. And so doing the best you can at that time that you're able to do, and meet that person with kindness and good intentions. And so when we start to look at that and live that way, it's a little bit easier for our kids to follow, because then they begin to mentor that and understand. But we have to understand that it's lateral violence that is happening to us within our own community, within the area that we live in, and even within the work area, with people not understanding and maybe talking down to us, thinking we don't understand, or belittling us. And even too, within the healthcare system, there's institutional racism within there. When they look at doing clinical reports and or clinical practice guidelines in the reporting, they do random controlled trials. Those are of an urban greater public when they're doing those controlled trials. Those aren't of necessarily an Indigenous population in a community. And then those, because of whatever that controlled trial came about, the results from that, and then they put that to us, to how we will do things. And then they put it on us, kind of like an experiment. This is what we found as the control and the things, and we're going to do that now. We have to stop that, decolonize the way that we do clinical practices and within healthcare, because it isn't working in our communities. We see the relapse, we see the addictions, we see the overdoses. Things are not working in our community. That medicine that is within the land that we are connected to, the healing is in there. The answer is within those medicines, within Mother Earth. And also the pain and suffering is within there. And as much time as it's taken for all of this to come about the last couple hundred years, it's going to take quite a bit of time of healing and reconciliation work to get underway for people to understand and start working towards being good relatives to each other. So thank you.
Thank you so much. And just typing into the chat, if you have any questions, please write them in the chat, and our guest speakers here will be able to address that in some way. And also, I want to have some of our other visiting elders and people here to have a few words on this subject. And we always turn to our elders to help inform us and give us some perspective on what we're talking about, especially when it's legacy issues like this with the lateral violence and the intergenerational trauma that we deal with. So I'd like to turn to my Aunt Glenda and Trudy there, if you're there, if you wanted to say a few words on this Pink Shirt Day.
Yeah, hello.
Hello.
Yeah, So my mom will talk. talk. Okay, hello.
Hello.
Um, thank you for inviting me, for letting me talk. I grew up in the residential school. I was there for 10 years. I was picked up from my home the day I turned 7, January 22. And from there, I stayed at the residential school for 10 years. I left my mom, my dad, my little sister. It was so hard for me. The day I got there, my mom fixed my hair before I went there. He fixed me up to go to school. She said, I will see my sisters there. But I didn't see my sisters when I got there. And they put me in a room and then they cut my braids off. My braids were on the floor. And they took my clothes and they washed me with a white powder. I think to kill lice or whatever. It was really strong stuff. They just throw that on your hair and they wash all your body. And then I learned every night I cried for my mom. I cried myself to sleep. And I live in fear, loneliness, hunger, and I began to learn to hate. There was no love, just hate. We never talked because when we talk, we get the strap. We were 7 years old, 8 years old. I think it was a pulley thing that had wire inside. They used that to strap us till we cry. They don't stop till we cry. In front of the school, the boys my age were made to cry in front of all of us. They weren't trying to teach us anything. I think they were trying to kill us. It was a terrible place to be. I'm still trying to heal from there. I don't think we'll ever heal. Maybe 7 generations we might heal. And I have parenting skills. I don't even know any of that. My husband too was from the residential school. We didn't have anything. No. And then we stayed together. We started drinking. And because I didn't know how to parent, I never hugged, loved my children. I give them orders like how they treat me at the school. You are wrong, I am right. You do as I say. And then one of my children committed suicide. I blame that on myself for 10 years because I didn't know how to parent. I still carry that with me. It's a lot of healing to do. But I still have my culture, my language. I was abused sexually, mentally, physically, spiritually, everything. They told us we came from the devil and we will return back there. Forever we will burn in a fire. That's what we were told. To this red guy who had a long tail and horns, we didn't know who he was. And I'm still having a hard time hugging my family, telling them I love them. It's hard, it's hard. It's hard to change. It's so hard to change from what I was, how they treat me at the residential school was, they did that to me every day until I learned their ways. My whole life was lost. Thank you. Thank you for listening to me.
Trudy, how is this, like, how did you experience this? Because you're the next generation when your mom goes through this, and how has this affected you and your kids?
I think I really liked what Amanda was saying, the
Mhm.
intergenerational trauma, where her mom had, or they couldn't hug their children like my mom said. I think that happened to me too, but now I have grandchildren and I hug them. I hug them all the time because I feel maybe my parents didn't hug me enough and that I needed a hug. Maybe that's why I'm doing that. But I think maybe I'm healing because I'm doing that. And now I give my mom hugs. I give my family hugs. I think we need to start maybe doing more of that in our communities. And yeah, I think the intergenerational trauma of parenting has affected all of us.
Mhm.
But we just do our best. And what Amanda was saying, like thank the Creator each day and look after your spirit. That
Mhm.
we walk the good red road. And my mom suffered in the residential school, and I've heard what happened to them since I was 4 years old. I was 4 years old, and they told me their stories, and I just have it. I just had it in myself, in my heart all the time. I learned empathy at 4 years old. So I think I helped them. Like the next generation, we helped our parents through their suffering. Like they told us their stories. They needed to tell their stories to someone who
Mm.
listen, who's gonna listen,
Yeah.
not in the, I don't know, in the church with a minister.
Yeah.
Maybe they want to tell that to them, but they told their families, and I think that's how we got through with the next generation.
Mhm.
And I'm really glad we have Zoom meetings like this, so we can my like residential school survivors can tell their stories, and that
Mhm.
the settler people will listen to people like my mom tell her stories.
Yeah. Yeah.
Thank
You. Yeah, that's much different than some of the way, like the tribunals that happened, and the questioning. Well, did they do the sexual abuse and what? And give the details and all of that. And then give money at the end. That's not a healthy way of confronting these issues. Teresa, did you want to add anything more about that question in the chat, or? And then we'll turn to Gloria if you wanted to say something. Go ahead, Teresa.
Oh, yeah, okay. I wasn't understanding the question there, and so I wanted to, I just wanted her to rephrase it, I guess, so I could understand what she was asking there. So are the teachings of the trauma and reasons for current behavior done on one-on-one in groups as well? And so I just asked her to clarify, so she did. And yeah, some of the work I do ranges from if it's work in communities, life skills, but I did many years ago develop a workshop for lateral violence and talk about staff turnover and what lateral violence looks like. and the origins of it. And there's actually a video on lateral violence by Bearspaw Legal that you can watch. It's about, I think, it's either 17 minutes or 17 minutes, I believe it is. And it shows a whole thing that a lot of us as Indigenous people can relate to. Also within this being the pandemic, I talked about how I couldn't go up to Northern Ontario to deliver workshops there in the community. So then what they did was everybody had Facebook so they could listen to me do a live. So then I ended up doing a series of about 14 lives on Facebook throughout the last year and a half on different topics, and lateral violence was one of them. And then what they did was they took the topics, the lives that I did, and they made them into podcasts, and then they played them on the radio station. And I actually just finished doing 3 for them this last weekend again on missing and murdered Indigenous women, dating safety, human trafficking, and domestic family violence. And so just depending on the work that, and Amanda is doing this work as well too, getting her facilitation training, and she's doing more workshops in the community. And so I'm glad to see that, because we need more of our people out there and who have the education, the knowledge, and the experience. And so I'm glad to see her doing the work too in the community. So there's a lot of different things that go on about that. And yeah, with Amanda, she's right in the community within our own community doing a lot of the work. And I think it's really needed because of the time with what's come about in the last year with the remains of the children, the bodies, and that coming about. And so really a crucial time for her to be doing the work that she's doing, because we know it's triggered a lot of families, a lot of survivors, and also it's starting to bring about that healing, because we're hearing them talk about their experience, which is a way of healing too. And so I'm grateful for my auntie speaking here tonight and sharing about her experience, because it lets us know what they endured in order for us to be here today. So Ishnish.
Snish. I just want to check if Amanda wanted to add anything else. Then I'll turn to Gloria just to give Amanda a chance to respond to that question as well.
Yeah, no, Ishnish, Teresa. Yeah, thank you. I do work directly here in the community, and I've done quite a few workshops for the agencies in the city of Calgary by Zoom, but hopefully we'll get back to in person soon. But I also do family circles. So when a family is more comfortable just coming in with a mother, daughter, in that unit, I'd be happy to sit down with them and have a chat and work with that family as well. So yeah, I've been doing quite a bit of work in regards to understanding the traumas of the residential school and intergenerational, and really focusing on teaching families Stoney traditional parenting. So I'd be happy to connect with anybody, and I'm willing to work with anyone that's willing to learn. And I just recently got back into facilitating after many years of just doing program coordinating. So I did that for about 7 years as well. So program development for the community. So I've totally gone in the direction of healing. And yeah, the recent findings, it's been really hard. It's re-triggered a lot of people, a lot of emotions, especially for my mother too. My mother she hasn't talked about many of her experiences, but I know when she was told about the discoveries in the first time, she called me and she said, I don't know why, but I'm scared. She's like, I have fear and I can't sleep without the light on. So I know it's impacting a lot of people in the community, as we had a residential school here, right here on our community. So many families have gone through there. So again, I appreciate the opportunity to come on here and share and get to meet everybody. And thank you, Trudy, And, you know, my heartfelt happiness and hope for healing for your mom too. Ishnish.
Gloria, if you wanted to add anything.
Ang wastage de gunchawa mentown just stubby. The Yahine to Amanda, to Glenda, and to Trudy. As we talk about Nariyaho Gipipa, the looking after your spirit, it's very important that we speak of the trauma, we speak of the historical abuses, that we work through the trauma. And I just want to say, because of the powerful sharing that my auntie did, I want to say that you matter. You are a matriarch, and we love you. You are a loving parent. You did the best you could do. And you did learn. You did learn a different way, but you still retain your culture. So to my auntie, you are so strong, and we love you. Part of that healing is that we acknowledge the hurts, but we also acknowledge the good. We also try to help and heal. As hard as that might be, I feel that the work I'm doing within the United Church as a student minister is to look at these as opportunities of healing for our survivors, for ourselves as a day school survivor, as a person that has intergenerational trauma in our family. We're going back 3 generations. And like it was said, 7 generations it will take to heal. So it's a tremendous amount of work that we need to do, and we can do, that we can bring hope and love and kindness to one another. This is one of the things that I do as a reconciliation minister. It's to help look at, why do we need to reconcile? What was the actual history of what happened? It's like the trauma and abuse that a person that's been bullied or been through lateral violence or been through, you're looking at the PTSD, you're looking at what happened, and you're speaking it and naming it. But then on the other side, you're looking at the traditional ways. Just like Carmen Lansdowne said, there are conventional Western ways of healing, but then there's also our traditional ways of healing. So those are the things where spirituality that was condemned or put away for our people, we want to bring that to the forefront. We want to honor those teachings. We want to honor that ceremony. We want to give back that cultural revitalization to our communities, to give our women a voice, to give our matriarchs a voice, to put back into the society the love and care and kindness. So I think when we're speaking of this as Teresa, as Amanda, as Glenda and Trudy, they are the ones leading with women to heal our communities. So I think that as a student minister myself, I'm at odds because I'm dealing with the United Church and its legacy. And how do you do this? How do you stand and be a student minister or a minister and know that this is what has transpired? How do you make peace and how do you reconcile? That's really the journey. How do we do this? We create opportunities of healing. It may be simple as helping a community member out, or providing a food hamper, or giving them a chance to do economic development, or giving them a chance to have a healing circle, or a women's conference, or a women's circle. There are very many ways, but at the end of it, it's asking what the First Nation would like to do. It's asking the women, the elders, what they would like to do, how they would like to heal, and presenting options to them. So I think that the work that we're doing here is educating and understanding, decolonizing, but it's also the next steps of what will we do. Now that we know this terrible legacy, the legacies of violence, which I don't even like the word legacy, because what kind of legacy is that? It's pulling down those pillars of the violence and replacing it with love and kindness in our communities of faith, and in the church. So those are the things that I think about when I hear the sharing. And I'm thankful to be here with you all today as we go forth on this journey of reconciliation. We try to look to lifting up our spirit. We try to look to healing as much as we can in the best ways. And know that we're still here. I think that's the most powerful thing, that we survived against insurmountable odds, and that we are still hopeful and kind and caring and loving. Thank you.
Thank you, Gloria. Yes, that's an important note to end on, that we are working through a lot, and yet we don't lose our humanity. We center ourselves in it. We remember what we've been taught, what our teachings say about this. There are any number of ways that we honor those kinship relationships and those stories that help to embed our way of thinking into the problems that we see today. So when the youth saw the elders suffering for lack of food at the beginning of the pandemic, they went and they prayed and they did the ceremonies that they were supposed to do. And they had the prayers for a good hunt to get meat and to provide for those that were in need. And so they did that. And they shored up our traditional teaching and our way of thinking so that we could live into those values again and remember from that we were a giving and a sharing society, that we had a regard for our own spirit, as we heard tonight, and for those of others, not just human, but also those in and around us from creation, those that are siblings and brothers and sisters as plants and animals and the mountains and other things that are we find relation with. So those are important parts of how we see the world and how we operate, how we see ourselves functioning in that world, that we are accountable to it and we take from it what we need, because that world is giving to us as well. So I just like to close off, ask my Aunt Glenda to say a prayer for us as we go to our rest, and as we put these things to bed for now, and we will address them again as we continue to grow and understand our reconciliation journey. So I'll turn this over to my Aunt Glenda for the closing prayer. Go ahead. Yeah.
O ya stengi tomis, o unchagije, tawa unchije, Jesus Christ unchamashije, tachangua kan, wa huku unchakije, wa hainchinije, na ingi tiabichin, nanga hais, nangu, etia nea, etiaf. Amen.
Shnish, thank you. And thank you for everyone for coming and for being part of this. And we will be taking part in our Lenten study, or the 8th is when we're going to be doing that. And so we look forward to continuing in our work with the community and in this reconciliation journey. So be well and take care, everyone, until we see you again. Thank you.